Today's podcast is brought to you by Audible. Get a free audiobook download and a 30-day free trial. Go to audibletrial.com/Rushmore. Over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player. Greetings and welcome to the Mount Rushmore podcast. My name is Jeff, and I'm joined, as always, by the two trusty individuals who I go around solving crimes with. I'm their sidekick. They're my sidekicks. We partner and we deduce things, and we get elementary on this biatch. And they are Richard.
Hello.
And Michael.
Howdy.
And
by the way, that's our problem, is we're all sidekicks.
Yeah,
We're
triple
all
sidekick
sidekicks.
situation. That's not helping us
not
out.
great, no.
every show needs a lead, and we're in search of one. So if you go on iTunes or Stitcher, please suggest who should be the star of the show.
Mark Maron would be good.
Mark Maron, yeah.
So let's just get him
You've
on.
got a following.
Just do that.
Joe Rogan, Adam Carolla, any of you guys. This is the Mount Rushmore podcast, and Richard and Michael debate the most ubiquitous of any given topic, and this week's topic is the Mount Rushmore of Sherlock Holmes adaptations. Elementary, why did you choose this?
A couple of reasons. The first, I think he is a pretty interesting literary character that has kind of survived for a long time. He's rude, he's brilliant, he's confident, almost too smart.
Sounds like you're describing Poochie from The Simpsons.
Or me,
He
possibly.
is Poochie. He's a drug addict, which is kind of strange for, a kind of a Victorian era character.
Okay, still me. Okay.
But at the same time, he kind of traverses both a Victorian landscape and into kind of the 20th century, which is interesting for a character to kind of live in both worlds. And thirdly, I was kind of interested in characters that are public property and stories that are kind of in the public domain now. I think it's going to be interesting because you can kind of do whatever you want with him as a character or whatever. And I think it's going to be interesting in 6 years, when like Mickey Mouse is basically Mickey Mouse passes into public domain.
The lawyers are hard at work preventing that.
Yeah. I was reading a bit about the 1998 Copyright Term Extension Act, which is also known as the Mickey Mouse Protection Act, where they are, currently trying to extend it out and push it out as far as possible. Yeah. And you kind of get the feeling that, at least as Mickey Mouse goes, like it's going to be just Steamboat Willie and just the black and white version of that Mickey Mouse, which will be kind of available to do. And
everyone's going to go, Steamboat Willie? Pass.
But I think it'll be interesting that character has kind of this looming in his future. But there are hundreds, thousands of other characters like Sherlock Holmes who has been kind of open for interpretation for a long time. And, and as we'll see, there's been like a lot of variety of how he is a character, or the concept of the show, or the shows and TV and movies and other books have kind of run with the ball.
Yeah. I was thinking, well, from what I understand, the Mickey Mouse, that has been the forefront of copyright or intellectual property law. The Disney lawyers have been the ones who've extended it multiple times.
Right.
So they've been the ones who've been pushing it each time. I don't know if they would be done if not for them. I am not a person who has read the Arthur Conan Doyle books, nor am I an individual who's seen more than, say, 2 or 3 different Holmes series and films. And so in doing my little bit of research, I've heard people talk about the parallel Holmes. When we talk about adaptations of Sherlock Holmes, they usually have a wellspring from different aspects, and some is the literature, and some is the character as portrayed in popular entertainment.
Sure.
And it reminds me of Dracula, Count Dracula, as we know him.
That's very interesting that you bring up Dracula, because I have a point to make about Dracula later.
Oh, cool. Okay. Okay, cool. Well, in that the person who helped adapt the Sherlock Holmes stories for the stage, William Gillette, is an individual who's often credited with coining things like elementary, my dear Watson, and using the hat and the pipe and all these things that we think of as assets pertaining to the Conan Doyle literature, when the reality is it's a very theatricalized version of it. And the Sherlock Holmes as the gentleman detective is somebody who's embodied in the novels, whereas this action figure, the superhero, is somebody who started on that stage, just like the Dracula character was formed on stage by Bela Lugosi and in films and things like that. So I find it interesting that a lot of times when I think of Sherlock Holmes, I think of that character that had its precedent in this William Gillette version of it, essentially turning the gentleman detective into a superhero. So it'd be fun to see when we discuss our adaptations where they come from. So
yeah.
Okay, so Michael Thunkett, and then Richard is going to start us off.
All right. So since there's
Please choose Steamboat Willie.
Oh no, we can't pay for that.
no, let's blur it out.
We'll release this in a couple years.
Yeah, exactly. So I do have 4 categories because there are so many different flavors of Sherlocks that we could do. So my categories are origin stories. My second one is animated. Third one is, hey, that's not Sherlock. Then the third one is modern day Sherlock. The fourth one. So first one, we'll go with the origin stories, and I'm going with the 1985 film Young Sherlock Holmes.
Very nice.
I would argue this is probably about the most fun Sherlock Holmes adaptation, and please come fight me about it if you want to.
Jeff, let's go fight him.
Let's go.
No, why should I fight him when there's a stained glass knight who's going to come out and fight you?
That was some badass CGI, by the way, for
I think
1985.
it was some of the first stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. It's a movie that holds up well, even though some of the CGI is a little crappy. Directed by Barry Levinson, written by Chris Columbus, otherwise known as the guy who ruined the first couple of Harry Potter movies, and also Home Alone and pretty much every other kind of mid-teen.
Now you say ruin.
They're not very great compared to the books.
Oh.
They're the weakest of the movies, those first couple.
This is a whole other podcast.
Yeah,
Wow, okay.
We'll get into it.
Okay.
Yeah.
You would beg to differ?
I think that they are ultimately too faithful to the book, but I think that they are delightful introductions to characters that grow out of that. Like by the time you get to the third one, it's completely off the rails and really fun. But I can understand it's a little too kidsy.
Let's just say he's the person who brought us Gremlins and Goonies as a writer. Definitely knows what he's doing as a writer.
Yeah, watched Gremlins 2 last night.
Oh, how was that?
Great. Talk about a guy in a Dracula costume. We're off the rails. We haven't mentioned Sherlock Holmes once.
Harry Potter's the one where Katniss has to kill all the other kids?
Yep.
Yes,
okay,
exactly.
Okay.
The first 7 are weird.
Okay.
And all the kids are actually vampires.
Oh.
To bring it back full circle.
Kick ass. Okay.
Yeah.
Young Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah, young Sherlock Holmes. I remember watching this as a kid. I think I even went to go see it in the theater. And if you haven't seen it, the basic premise is that Holmes and Watson meet at a boarding school in London or in England. And this is they get involved in solving their first crime together. And it's an interesting story because it is, even though it's obviously non-canon, it is trying to set up how does Holmes become who he is in the stories that we know.
Yeah.
And at least as presented in Young Sherlock Holmes, he is not someone who is kind of cold and calculating and distant. Yeah, he's got some of the arrogance to him, but he's also very emotional. And in fact, his fencing instructor kind of has to try and tell him, stop being so emotional. That's why you're getting beaten in duels.
Uh-huh.
And through the course of the whole movie, that's where you start to see, okay, things happen. By the end of the movie, he's sort of got that reserve that you sort of anticipate Holmes to have. And it's a high concept, and I think it's a concept that if
did that come before Young Indiana Jones Chronicles?
Ooh, I think it did.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it might be one of the first ones I can think of where it's like, let's take a character you know really well and tell this backstory that you didn't know about them. And it really does rely pretty heavily on the viewer knowing Sherlock Holmes and kind of understanding.
Knowing all the tropes of him.
The tropes and kind of either explaining them or why they came to be, like they explain why he has the hat and the pipe and everything like that, or sort of playing off of them, which is a thing that you see in a lot of these Holmes sort of adaptations, right? And you mentioned that, I think, earlier. It's the idea of, I mean, you did, Michael, just this idea that it's so well known at this point that a lot of these adaptations kind of have to bounce off into, I think it was Jeff's point, bounce off of what we know in popular culture about them as much as the actual however many stories Arthur Conan Doyle wrote.
Yeah. If it were the Dracula thing, you would see a young Count Dracula finding some hair gel, and he's taming his frizzy hair,
right,
and slicking it back,
getting a tan. Yeah, he becomes George Hamilton.
Yeah, he's
that's a different. that's old Dracula, not young Dracula.
Yeah. What I'd love to discuss at some point along the way, what are the qualities? Must Watson be present or a Watson type character?
Yes, I think so.
Okay.
Usually, yeah.
Okay.
He needs like someone that he ultimately kind of relies on, but he kind of insults along the way. Like he needs someone that is more helpful than he gives credit for initially.
Yeah. And Watson's also kind of the stand-in for the audience.
Yeah.
He's the person that Holmes can explain his deductions to.
Yeah.
So when Holmes goes, oh, well, you love custard and you come from Wales and here's the town that you're from. Holmes needs to be the person who goes, wait, how do you know all that?
Yeah.
That way, Watson needs to be the person who does that.
Yeah,
that way Holmes can kind of...
It slows it down for the audience a little bit.
It does seem like if you were to do an Indiana Jones film, you would have this globe-trotting, artifact-saving archaeologist encountering the supernatural. And Holmes, if for an adaptation to be a Holmes adaptation or to be Sherlockian, it's got to be... He's using deduction and science, or using facts to deduct, or observations.
It's almost the opposite.
Yeah,
he's debunking in many cases these things that were otherwise presented as being supernatural, like the Hound of Baskervilles or something like that.
Another component. Well, let's move on. So, cool. So, do you have categories, Michael?
No, I'm kind of free flowing,
free ball on it.
It's free winging it.
Laundry day.
Because he's free, free falling.
My first one is the Fox television show House.
Oh, lovely.
From 2004. Ran from 2004 to 2012, starring Hugh Laurie as Dr. Gregory House, and House is obviously a stand-in for Holmes. The entire show is like a forensic, weekly detective show, but it involves the human body. And the character, it isn't like overwhelmingly Holmesian, Sherlockian, but there are definitely a number of different tropes that kind of keep popping up throughout the series and the character. There are all these different aspects of Sherlock Holmes that kind of arise in the Gregory House character. He is addicted to painkillers like Sherlock was for a medical issue that he has. He has like a dead leg, basically. He had like something called like an infarction, which is the funniest disease. Funniest condition you can have is an infarction.
Infarction.
Yeah. Which is like dead cells, like necrosis. And so he takes like Vicodin to tame that, but that's, he's kind of operates with a sidekick like we were talking about, his friend Wilson instead of Watson, who is his right-hand man, the person that is like the only human element that he can kind of deal with. He's very dickish.
Yeah.
He's an a-hole. He's overconfident. He's all the characteristics of Sherlock Holmes, except he's like this American doctor.
Yeah.
I think that's one of my favorite aspects about the show is when he started winning Emmy Awards.
Right.
Hugh Laurie he'd be on the red carpet and he'd be interviewed and he'd speak in his English accent, his British accent.
Right.
And all the people would be like, "What? What's going on?" But the show I really enjoyed for a few years. He kind of fell into that, late 90s, early 2000s troubled white man sort of syndrome that maybe all shows seem to have. The what was the HBO show?
6 Feet Under?
No, with the gangster. But yes.
Oh,
Boardwalk Empire?
Boardwalk Empire.
But Breaking Bad is certainly one. The Mafia one.
The Sopranos.
Sopranos. Thank you. Dumb. I deduced that. I used my assistant.
It's elementary, Michael.
That's right. But it's just it's funny because like they've done other shows like Elementary, which is like kind of just a direct ripoff. But I like that this was a more subtle show that used the same characteristics that didn't necessarily make him a detective.
Yeah. The components that make up House, again, I think House is essentially a superhero. Sherlock Holmes is a superhero. He's just intellectually stronger, and he's able to. He's faster than the speeding bullet intellectually, and I'm fascinated with this character as portrayed. I don't know who's going to bring it. Maybe somebody will bring up this other adaptation. Fascinating thing. William Gillette, who popularized the character, was also American, and British audience did not enjoy American theatricals and performances until him.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and so Holmes has often been a British person, a Yank playing British.
There's definitely something that is, thematic about the way that he solves his particular medical crimes, or not medical crimes, but medical issues. Is that he's kind of constantly looking past, like he expects everyone to lie to him, and expects that there's like a deeper truth, and he just hasn't gotten there yet, and he has to, he's just working it all out.
Yeah.
He's a forensic doctor, so to speak, but
and also he doesn't really. I think much like Holmes, he cares about the mystery of it and how to solve it. He doesn't actually care about the patients.
Yeah, that's always pretty fun to see people come in and expect to have their hand held by a doctor, and then he just kind of kicks the legs out from under them, and it's just like, well, this, you've got some crazy disease of the week. It's also one of those crazy disease of the week shows.
Sure, it's Quincy basically, but with an a-hole.
Yeah.
Okay, Richard, what's your second?
All right.
Richard, who's looking a lot like Nick, what's this Parks and Rec guy?
Nick Offerman?
Nick Offerman, the beard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I am.
Good for podcasts, visual descriptions of things.
Yeah, especially doing Ron Swanson over on podcasts. Pretty boring.
Richard, what's your second choice?
My second choice is, we're going to animated here, and it's interesting. We were talking about Disney and the copyright laws, because this is an example of Disney actually playing not fast and loose, but taking advantage of something going into the public sphere with 1986's The Great Mouse Detective.
Ah, wonderful.
One of my favorite Disney movies, I would say Professor Ratigan in particular, voiced by, of course, by Vincent Price. One of the most underrated Disney villains of all time.
There's that was during a very strange Disney period. Like that kind of early 80s, Fox and the Hound. There was something else that kind of came out. I'll have to think about it.
There's a lot of things that seem Disney, but they might not have been like the great, like Fievel Goes, the Don Bluth things and the...
Sure.
Yeah.
It actually came out right after Black Cauldron.
There you go. There's another strange one. Another strange adaptation.
It's getting out. Yeah. So that's where they don't, Disney, it feels like they don't exactly know what a Disney movie is at that point.
Yeah.
This was actually originally conceived as possibly a Rescuers sequel.
Oh.
Then they decided, well, let's just do it with it, create their own characters instead of just rehashing those characters. And this was really, I think, in a lot of ways, the movie that got Disney animation back on track. Even though it wasn't a huge hit, it was very successful. And it was the first one that when Jeffrey Katzenberg had taken over Disney Animation. And so it was the first one that he was involved with. And I guess he really basically put the animators under a lot of stress on purpose just to see if they could actually pull it off.
Oh.
The guys who directed it wound up directing Little Mermaid and Aladdin.
Oh.
So this is really where they cut their teeth and got to
John and Ron Clements and
John Musker.
Musker, yeah.
And as a movie itself, it's just there's a lot of Sherlock Holmes adaptations where it's sort of based off of someone who's adjacent to Sherlock Holmes, or sort of in Sherlock Holmes's like stream.
John Holmes was not an example of that. After some research, I've realized that.
There you go.
Well, there's some logical deduction taking place on that one, but
I saw the Larry Holmes heavyweight match.
Oliver and Company was another in like that came out right around that same period, where it was like a strange Disney adaptation of another source material. And Disney does a lot of that. I mean, The Little Mermaid was adapted from all of them are, but it's funny when they feel like a little too I don't know, like you said, Don Bluthy.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've use that as an adjective at this point.
It's a little Bluthy.
Yeah,
I've never seen The Great Mouse Detective like as an adult, or I don't think as a kid. I went to go see it in like a test screening of it.
Oh, really?
How strange is that? This came out in '86, and I was 8 years old, and I think I must have gone to see it with my dad's friend, who was like a movie producer, and him. And I remember seeing like an unfinished movie, and seeing like this movie in like pencil tests, and it would go in and out of like finished animation and then pencil tests, and it was like, I don't know if that's what's kind of led me to like never see it, to feel like I've kind of seen it, so I kind of know about it, but I'm interested. I'm interested to see it again as an adult, to see how it.
I would recommend it. We showed it to the kids last year, and they really liked it. There are some scenes in there that are actually just straight up scary.
Oh,
like for the littles. Like there's some. It's very interesting that you could tell that they wanted to do more of an adult, mature style of animation and storytelling.
Yeah.
But they also knew there's only so much they could get away with. So there's like some scenes where there's violence, but instead of showing the violence, they show a character sort of seeing
reacting
to it. You can see like the shadows and what's happening. There's a lot. There's like the bat, who's like the main villain, like the villain's henchman, which is a kind of a frightening thing, especially when you take it and scale it down to like, if you're a mouse, I mean, holy fuck.
Yeah.
Bat, no good.
Bat, no good.
Bat, no good.
What I also think is interesting about this pick is that it's like a double adaptation, because it was based on the Basil of Baker Street
book series,
which is based on Sherlock Holmes. So it's like it's double dipped and then over to Disney.
And then they actually have Basil Rathbone in one scene.
Or do they?
As the voice of Sherlock Holmes, that you hear him saying something.
Oh, that's clever.
Then they pan down. Like I think it's the very beginning that you hear him. What they actually did is they got audio from him doing an audio book, or not audiobook. I think it was like a radio production of one of the Sherlock Holmes plays, and they actually just used that because they couldn't get him. I don't know if he was still alive or just they couldn't get him, whatever the deal was. But they actually just used that for the dialogue.
That's amazing. I'm fascinated. We've done episodes about holiday films, or I think comic books. I'm amazed how big this world is that Sherlock Holmes sits in, and how many adaptations, how it can be made for young people, how it can be made with mice, how the story can be told in so many different eras. It always seems like there's always going to be crime. There's always going to be somebody who uses
to solve a crime,
his intellect to solve it.
And it's interesting that because there's this whole side plot with this orphan, and that's the case they're trying to solve. So being like a Disney story, they kind of had to. You get the sense that they felt like they needed to have Basil have his heart warmed by the end. He winds up like taking the orphan in and adopting her after everything's said and done, which of course would never happen in an actual Sherlock Holmes story.
No.
So you could tell there's like the Disneyfication of what you would consider to be the traditional Sherlock Holmes plot, the kind of flow.
Quick aside, talk about underrated Disney films. The Rescuers Down Under.
It's really good.
Great.
I think Michael's on the Disney movie. IMDb right now.
No, I'm not.
Hey, the computer wore tennis shoes. Come on, quick aside.
Real good.
Was that an adaptation?
Well, I just
He's pretty smart.
As soon as
that's a Holmes.
As soon as you mentioned like the Lost Child, and that it could have possibly been a sequel to the first Rescuers, which came out just a handful of years earlier, and then knowing that they did the Rescuers Down Under, maybe. And
they had an orphan that they happened to rescue.
Yeah. I just started connecting the dots. I started deducing.
By the way, Jeff, thank you for ruining my next pick, which is going to be Larry Holmes and pro golfer Tom Watson teaming up to fight crime.
Katie Holmes escaping Scientology is a whole Holmes adaptation. Michael, you're second.
Well, I'm going to stay in the realm of cartoons.
Okay.
The 1959 Looney Tunes short, Deduce, you say.
Wait, what did you just say?
The 1959
Deduce, you say?
Looney Tunes short. Deduce, you say.
Deduce, you say.
Featuring the Deuce.
Featuring Daffy Duck as Sherlock Holmes and Porky Pig as his sidekick, Watkins.
Watkins.
This is just like you said, like pure silliness.
Yes.
Daffy Duck, very good as a character at being arrogant and thinks he's smarter than everyone else, and just a little dickish as a duck. He's an a-hole.
Yeah.
The short opens with him deducing things. He's doing deductions, actually, for his taxes, trying to write off cab fare and a bunch of other silly things when someone comes to the door, and he thinks it's like a dead body, but it's actually a note. With saying that the Shropshire slasher has gotten out of prison. Something
I love all these things that Daffy Duck would say in a very funny way with S's.
Shropshire slasher has a character called a villain has gotten out of prison, and then he has to kind of track him down. It's as a Looney Tunes short, he just keeps getting one-upped constantly, mostly by his own insignificance, his own stupidity, incompetence, and then my favorite is just Porky Pig as Watkins coming in, just very mild-mannered, ends up saving the day over and over.
Yeah.
He picks him up. He kind of, when the Shropshire slasher finally does show up, he kind of talks him into surrendering. Of course, Daffy insults his mom that shows up out of nowhere, and it's just delightful. I love that Daffy, much more than Bugs Bunny, is a character that you can apply these other like you can put these templates on him. Like you were talking about how Sherlock Holmes is like this character. You can to see it all over the place. Daffy Duck has been a cowboy in a very similar situation with kind of Porky Pig as his sidekick. He's been like a spaceman, with his Duck Dodgers persona. He's done this role as like Robin Hood. But I liked that you can, with that one character, that you can just throw all these costumes on, have basically the same character underneath, but he can fill all these different roles. And I think that's unique to Daffy as a character than kind of any other either Disney or kind of Warner Brothers cartoon characters.
Oh, it's interesting. I wonder why. Is it because we will revel in how quickly he fails at these endeavors? I think of him as like Jethro Bodine from the Beverly Hillbillies being a secret agent, not, or he becomes a beatnik. Or
I think that they all tend to be very competent and confident characters. Buck Rogers is kind of like a, ever-worldly spaceman who's the hero, and same thing with Robin Hood, who's the confident hero, and Sherlock is certainly confident and arrogant and smart, and then Daffy is like kind of neither.
Right.
He's none of them.
He thinks he's all of those, but he is in fact none of them.
And I think I also wanted something that was a little bit of comedy. Like looking through my list and looking through all these things, everything was very serious. Like, I don't know, Richard, did you have like a Basil Rathbone selection?
No, I don't.
And I had this whole thing written up where I was going to talk about the origins of like the first really important onstage character, but it was way too serious.
Right.
And then I started thinking like, oh, this doesn't connect to me in any way. My connection to Sherlock Holmes is through 7 minutes of Daffy Duck falling down and getting his beak stuck in the thing. And
that's actually straight from the stories.
That's right. That was the Hounds of the Baskervilles.
Yes.
But I don't know, like my connection to that character is more through the silliness of but what you can do with him.
Yeah. Another funny aside was that by the time, and I keep harping on the derivative Holmes that was created by by Gillette. By the time Gillette started to adapt the Sherlock Holmes stories for plays, Arthur Conan Doyle was sick of Sherlock Holmes and wanted to killed him off.
But but they wouldn't let him, right? I think that's part of the deal is that. If I know this correctly, he had wanted to kill him off for a while, and his publisher was like, "No, you can't kill him off. It's way too popular."
Yeah, but it is funny to think of how many creative people have seen the character, and maybe they're not tired of it, but they know they have to adapt it for another audience. They have to do something to breathe life into it.
So we're talking about Penn Jillette is who we're talking about.
Yeah, Penn Jillette. That's right.
And then Teller was a mute Watson.
That's right.
Is that what the story
That's right.
is?
That's right.
Let's pitch this, guys. Yeah. Get Hollywood on it.
I mean, we're not going to survive to see what happens when Superman becomes public.
Yeah.
There's so many characters that are, I think that's part of it. There's so many that are like corporate characters that aren't necessarily, at some point they were kind of creator owned, but then ultimately they're owned by Timely Comics, then DC Comics or whatever. But like, it's interesting to see these characters that like our children's children will be like, oh yeah, it's just another Superman whatever.
Yeah.
And there's just hundreds of the. I mean, there are already hundreds of Superman characters.
The DC Comics doing a pretty good job of that, anyways, on their own.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
So we are at our halftime, and want to thank you for listening, and want to thank you for going to the Mount Rushmore podcast pages out in social media. They exist on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and joining us in the dialogue that we have with our fans. I hope you're a fan. Our fans have suggested topics. Our fans have ultimately joined us on the show in conversation and debate about the Mount Rushmore of any given topic of their choosing. So go out to those social media sites and make your voice heard. Also, you can do that on iTunes and Stitcher. We would love to get a rating, get a review. We would really love to hear what you think about the podcast and what episodes are your favorites. You can also help us by helping podcasting in general, by going out and supporting the other podcasters who are making great content out there, who might not be the Mark Marons or the Joe Rogans or the Adam Carollas, and not part of a big network. So we want to do a promo for one of our favorites, and here it is.
Hey everyone, my name is Jim Hankey, and I'm the host of Vinyl Emergency, a podcast where musicians, producers, comedians, and those who dream up, press, release, or collect vinyl records discuss their relationship with the medium today as well as in their formative youth. Artwork that has stood the test of time, neighborhood record stores we remember, the first albums we ever bought, vinyl's warmth and sound. The tangible object of a vinyl record can bring forth so many intangible memories, and that's what we try to capture on the show. Guests have included Roseanne Cash, Ben Montench of Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, Brian Stack from Conan and The Late Show with Stephen Colbert, Ted Leo, Lily Hyatt, and Dave Porter of Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul. We've been known to do an episode or two in front of a live audience as well, and we also talk to everyday record collectors about what drives their passion. We even have episodes dedicated to the processes of mastering for vinyl, properly cleaning your records, the feeling of standing in line for hours on record store day, and much more. Tune into Vinyl Emergency however you get your podcasts. Visit us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Vinyl Emergency, or stop by our website, vinylemergency.com.
And we also want to give you something. That's right. You, the listeners of the Mount Rushmore podcast, Audible is offering you a free audiobook download with a free 30-day trial to give you the opportunity to check out their service. You could check out what I think is probably amazing, and that's Stephen Fry reading the Sherlock Holmes books, as of course written by Arthur Conan Doyle, and that's unabridged and out there on Audible on Amazon.
Ooh, I want to check.
Check that out. Yeah, with
so you
Audible,
should get a free trial, Michael.
Yeah. And hear him alongside of House as Fry and Laurie.
There you go.
Doing Wooster and Jeeves. But with Audible, that's not all. There's 180,000 other titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle player.
Get your friend Andrew just to start telling you what he heard on a podcast once.
MP3 player or violin. You can play it on a screeching violin. 30-day trial, all the things I said. Download your free audiobook by going to audibletrial.com/Rushmore. Again, that's audibletrial.com/Rushmore for your free audiobook. We're back.
Okay, we should go around the table real quick.
Yes.
And just throw out the different like Holmesian tropes. Because you mentioned violin. That's a good one. Violin.
Pipe.
Got a pipe. Drug addict of some sort.
Tropes.
Watson kind of is like a writer, right? Usually. Doctor. Yeah, and he's a doctor as well.
Mm-hmm.
Lives at 221B Baker Street.
Yeah,
in some version of that.
There's usually a housekeeper.
Oh, yeah.
Who's always being put upon. Get Moriarty, some version of
Moriarty. You need his nemesis.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of the adaptations too kind of make a lot of callbacks to the previous stories in some way.
Sure.
Referencing like the titles of the short stories or whatever.
Or there's a dog usually involved.
Is there a dog?
A hound.
Yeah.
A hound and a
They call back to those a lot in these.
Anyway.
Okay.
Good job, guys.
All right.
We did it.
We did it. We done did it. Richard, what's your third?
All right. So this is in the category of, hey, that's not Holmes. And I realized that 3 of my 4 choices were like all mid-'80s. I don't know if there was there like a Sherlock Holmes mania happening in the mid-'80s that I've just sort of forgotten about?
Yeah, when Andre the Giant fought him at Holmes Mania 3,
right.
It was a big event.
Yeah.
The power of deduction was running wild on you. So 1988, the British comedy film Without a Clue.
Oh, I loved this film.
I didn't know this.
Oh, yeah, starring Ben Kingsley as Dr. John Watson. And in this version of the story, he is actually the person who is publishing the Sherlock Holmes stories in the Strand magazine, which is where Arthur Conan Doyle actually published them. And he actually takes the stories from the crimes that he's going out and solving incognito, because as a doctor, he believes it wouldn't be prudent for him to be seen as a guy going, the shadow of the night solving crimes.
Oh, Michael Caine's in this.
Michael Caine is
All
in
right.
it. And
playing wonderfully against type, I think.
yeah, a little bit.
Yeah.
He's so basically, long story short, Watson realizes he needs to hire someone to be Sherlock Holmes. And so he gets a sort of like alcoholic, unemployed actor, played by Michael Caine. And as these things naturally happen, Caine as Sherlock Holmes has to eventually become Sherlock Holmes and actually help to solve the case that they're on.
Yeah.
And it's just a fun movie. And they do, again, there's a lot of callbacks to the story. I think there's a lot of examples. This is not the only example of, maybe this is one of the tropes where it turns out the person you think is actually the genius was just sort of a stand-in, or he's not actually the genius. It's actually the other person.
Yeah.
Basically, this is like Remington Steele, is what it is.
Yeah.
Just with Holmes and Watson.
Mm-hmm. Or it's a Romancing the Stone.
Yeah, there's an element of that.
Joan Wilder is Watson. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's there's that whole kind of trope of movies, and it's sort of like, well, what happens if we take that and we translate it to the Sherlock Holmes narrative? What if you make it so Sherlock Holmes actually wasn't as smart as everyone thought he was? I don't know if you had Sherlock Holmes' younger brother.
No,
on there, but I think that's another one that's
I remember Smarter Brother. Yeah,
that's what I would say. And that's another one where they think they kind of play with that a little bit as well. But it's just fun to kind of have the idea of Holmes as a literary concept and have that be acknowledged in the movie.
Yeah, and
then kind of play around with it. So it's like there never really was an Arthur Conan Doyle, but there was a John Watson. And what if he was actually the person who was writing these stories? How would that turn out? So I would encourage people to go see it. I remember this is one that was on HBO a lot when I was a kid. And there's always, I was personally intrigued by the Sherlock Holmes stories to begin with. I was someone who, as a kid, my favorite book series was the Encyclopedia Brown stories.
Yeah, I was wondering if those would come up as...
Which, by the way, in hindsight, totally could have been one of the picks. Did you read those, Michael?
No.
Were you familiar with them at all?
No, the name's familiar. I just never read them.
Yeah, I would read all of those, and they were basically the kid detective.
Yeah.
He's not quite, he's not really Holmes-like, I guess, but he's very deductive and
he's on crack.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's addicted to big league
host of snowballs.
Big league chew. Yeah. But so I read all of those books when I was a kid. So going from that, I guess the next step up was actually Sherlock Holmes itself. And I've read a couple of the stories. I don't think I've read all of them. But I am like one of those people who's probably more familiar with the adaptations of it than the actual story itself, which is just fascinating to me that Sherlock Holmes is this enduring character, but the actual Sherlock Holmes stories themselves, nobody's read them.
Yeah.
Like in our generation, next to nobody really has.
Yeah.
We know it because we know whatever version of Sherlock that we know.
That, Without a Clue, was one of my favorite moments. Was in the finale, I believe Moriarty or somebody chases them. The villain chases them. They lead him into a theater. Right. And Michael Caine is an accomplished theater performer, but a moron. But he has to convince Watson that now that they're in the theater, he is in his element.
Right.
And he has this amazing confidence that now that he's in this theater, he shall be able to triumph. And it involves swordplay and trapdoors and all these things. And you realize, oh shit, he wasn't lying.
Right. He actually knows what to do around
he knows the exact rope to pull to drop a sandbag on somebody because he's an actor.
It kind of turns into a little bit of a Looney Tunes cartoon at the end with that kind of chase scene. It's a little bit less...
I want to see this movie.
Yes.
Yeah, I think it's really up your alley. Music by Henry Mancini, who also did the music for Great Mouse Detective.
Oh, is that right?
So he was on the Sherlock Holmes gravy train there for a while.
Pink Panther, he's a detective composer.
Detective fan, I suppose, yeah.
That gives me a lot of promise for the Holmes and Watson film, which Hugh Laurie is in, but Holmes and Watson are played by Will Ferrell and John C. Reilly coming up this Christmas. So
I'm less hopeful about that. I think
the Talladega Nights.
That's gonna be great.
Yeah,
Are you kidding me?
I'm a little concerned about Will Ferrell. I'm not gonna lie.
Will Ferrell and John C. Reilly have only made great movies together.
That's true. I guess the two of them I should feel pretty good about.
They've got chemistry.
Well, I love when American actors are surrounded by actual real life Brits. So I love to see them try to get the dialect down. You could just know that Hugh Laurie's rolling his eyes in every shot. So Michael, your third one is what?
My third one is the Beekeeper's Apprentice, the 1994 book by Laurie R. King.
Wow, never heard of this.
She ultimately wrote 14 or 15 books in a series about this character named Mary Russell. And the first book, called The Beekeeper's Apprentice, was about this young girl, Mary Russell, who's a teenager, whose parents die, so she goes to live with her aunt in Sussex, and ends up meeting a retired Sherlock Holmes, and befriending him, and becoming a student of his, and becoming an apprentice of his, and becoming a partner of his in, solving crimes and whatnot. It was kind of set in the 1910s, after 1910s to 1920s, maybe in the 1920s, after Holmes had retired, done some service for during World War I as a spy, and he kind of retired as a beekeeper. It was a callback to one of the last Conan Doyle books called The Last Bough, where he kind of has retired and says, I just take up beekeeping. But what it does is it kind of casts a new... she kind of took the idea of Holmes and what it would have been like for someone kind of growing out of a kind of a post-Victorian world to be a woman, like a female Sherlock Holmes. And so far, a lot of this, all these Holmesy stories are very male-centric. And the Victorian era was such an interesting time of this combination of kind of a stiff society that's starting to loosen up and starting to get a little bit more progressive, but has still, a lot of holding everyone back. And this kind of new technology that kind of is burgeoning out. And I know that the Sherlock Holmes books kind of dealt with that. He always kind of dealt with the telegraph, and he dealt with, the burgeoning electric light and gas lamps and all that stuff kind of coming up. And they kind of deal with that in this book too, is like the next, next kind of generation of technology. And he's like this character that kind of, like we talked about at the beginning, kind of straddles these two worlds. He's someone that grew up in a very strict society, but then also someone who's kind of in the future a little bit, in the 20th century a little bit. But the character herself is very Holmesian. She's very confident and smart and creative and deductive. And she kind of creates her as like a perfect kind of counterpart to Holmes without being like a Watson.
Yeah.
And throughout the book series, I know that in the first book, she's a lot younger. She's 15 or 16. And there's like no romantic anything between the two characters, which is kind of refreshing for a book. Like there's, in later subsequent series, they get married and whatever. But like, so there's like just, it's a nice balance between these two characters of one, that are both kind of on equal footing, but then one of them has a ton of other kind of social difficulties because she's a woman. Has trouble getting into Oxford. She has trouble driving a car. She has to dress up like a man to do a bunch of different things, where as a woman, she ordinarily wouldn't want to.
Yeah. That's interesting, like adding the caste system that still exists in a country where they actually have royalty and stuff, and socioeconomical caste system, but also the gender non-diversity and the rights of women that were so much more limited, and the career limitations are that and adds such an interesting component to that, because we also imagine, even though he's does not suffer fools, Holmes might be a little bit sensitive to that. Is he in the book sensitive?
I don't recall. Off the top of my, it's been a long time since I read that one, and I don't think I ever read any of the subsequent books. But it's been years. And years.
Okay. Cool suggestion. Richard IV.
Fourth one is modern day Sherlock, and that is Sherlock.
Yeah, also on my
The
list.
TV series.
Oh, okay.
Love this. Love the series. Kind of rekindled my love of Sherlock Holmes when I started watching it a few years ago.
Yeah.
And once again, proof that the Brits do it better by doing, however, did they do like three or four?
There's three. There's usually, they did 3 a season, and they've done a total of like 13 episodes.
They've done like a Christmas special and a couple other things. But that's the best way to do it. So basically you get 3 different movies every year or every season when they decide to come out with one. And of course, this is known as the series that let it be known that Cumberbatch was an actual thing.
Yeah.
Not just a silly name that you could come up with. Silly name attached to a really good actor.
He's great.
And so is Martin Freeman.
Yeah, he's great.
And
Martin Freeman has been great in everything I've ever seen him in.
Yeah.
I'll even say Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
I think that's an underrated movie.
Yeah.
So, even Love Actually, he's actually got the least annoying, least annoying plot line of the whole movie.
He's also good as Bilbo Baggins, but it's tough because the movie was just so bloated. All of those,
it's not certainly not his fault. And I'm interested in this adaptation because they basically made it pretty clear without expressly saying it that Holmes is probably on the autism spectrum in this version.
Mm-hmm.
He is somebody who just doesn't understand how to make connections with people.
Yeah.
It's almost less, there isn't the Holmes sort of arrogance to it, but it's also the fact that it's not that he's doing this on purpose. It's almost that he doesn't know how to make these connections. And beyond sort of the idea of how is he going to solve these crimes and how is he going to defeat Moriarty, as much as it's about that, I think it's even more so about him making connections with people in his world and not just being somebody who is insular and sort of just solves his crimes all inside of his head. It's about him actually having a friendship for the first time probably in his life and having to make moral choices based on friendships and people that he now cares for, which is something that he would never have to do before. I do love the relationship with him and Mycroft. I think that's one of the great brother.
We haven't really
combos.
Talked about, and I think that's one thing that I think the Mycroft. The only thing I think they get wrong is the Mycroft relationship. In that Mycroft as a character is supposed to be this giant fat guy who is 100 times smarter than Sherlock. He's just too lazy. He just doesn't care. And I think that him being this kind of
stylish but stuffy kind of
government entity. I don't know. It just it does. That's the only aspect of the show that I don't like. I love their interpretation. I love their version of Moriarty. I love their now what seems kind of outdated like Watson's blog of like how he like characterized
blogs.
Yeah.
It's getting close to Creed thoughts.
I know that when the show started coming out in 2010, and that was kind of on the edge of when like no one had a live travel anymore.
Yeah. Do you think he's going to have a podcast by this next season?
Oh my God, that would be
100% he's going to have a podcast.
But Let's
get him on the show.
The show is so good, and it kind of reaches back to something that I have talked about a few times, which is like this technology thing, and something I wanted to talk about with Dracula. Dracula was another book that, was a Victorian era book that also featured a heavy use of technology, whether it was the telegraph or the electric light or movies or
medical technology, like transfusions.
Like the steam engine in the train. Like the Dracula, the movie that came out in the 90s, really is one of the few kind of things that have kind of captured that aspect of Dracula properly. Like they have like these interstitials and like this use of technology. And that's what I like. That's what I like about this Victorian era Dracula and like this Victorian era Sherlock and this new Sherlock is that he is like up to speed on texting and maps and contacts and
GPS and all
GPS
this crap,
and using technology to be a file for his stuff. Like I think it was done very cleverly and very stylishly.
Well, sure, it's a very stylish show.
Yeah,
I do like the idea of the memory bank or his memory palace.
Yes,
where that basically takes you inside his head to let you understand. Okay, how is he able to sort of have these volumes of knowledge and be able to extract whatever he needs at any one time? And
has he heard of the cloud?
Cloud computing? Yeah, he just should store it up there. And there was interesting. One of the big bads for one of the seasons also had his memory palace, except his was even more detailed and I guess more refined than Holmes's was. And that was just something he couldn't. It's like this. Once he realizes this, it's basically you can almost see his whole world kind of get undercut from him because it's like, wait a second, I'm not special. I'm not the only person who does this.
Yeah.
Uh-oh.
One thing that I think a good presentation of Sherlock Holmes is predicated on having a leading person playing that character who has a believable innate intelligence. And when Benedict Cumberbatch plays that character, you have this belief in this guy as an intellectual person who has an innate intelligence to them. And when Cumberbatch also played Doctor Strange, I felt in a way that he was much like Holmes still.
They're similar characters.
Similar. That Doctor Strange has this I think they were trying to play up his arrogance a little bit more, his skill as a surgeon, his flashiness. He was drawn to some material things that I don't know if Holmes would be drawn to. Selfish. And then there's scenes in some of the Avengers films where Doctor Strange is interfacing with Tony Stark, played by Robert Downey Jr., who has also played Holmes. And although I love Robert Downey Jr., and I think of him,
Martin Freeman also.
And Martin Freeman,
also in there.
Yeah. Then Martin Freeman's across from Andy Serkis in Wakanda,
it's all connected.
Playing Gollum. I think Tony Stark. Downey plays Tony Stark in a place where you believe his intelligence as Tony Stark, but I never believed him as Holmes for some reason. Less so than Cumberbatch.
I think the trouble that I had with that one was, I didn't believe it. I think it was also too. We talked about how Sherlock is stylish in a certain way, and I thought that it was
too stylish.
Yeah, in a different way. Like it was too like.
It's McG. It was like overly.
Oh, was it McG?
Yeah, wasn't it? Or was
it's what's his Mr. Madonna?
Yeah, the second one was McG. I think he produced it. The first one was Guy Ritchie.
Yeah,
that's right.
So it's all that kind of lock, stock, and two smoking barrels, like lots of
too clever for its own good.
But it does tell the story from the point of view. When Holmes tells Watson how he deduced the identity of a stranger, he goes through this what is very cinematic description of what that individual is wearing, how the heel on his right foot was ground down. He's got a dueling scar on his left cheek. You can imagine the snap zooms.
Oh yeah,
just like a Guy Ritchie film. But it did have so much.
I didn't mind.
Directorial meddling.
I didn't mind it. It wasn't terrible. I remember seeing it in theater, and I walked out like, that's okay.
To bring it back to Sherlock, it does revel in its cheekiness and cleverness. That show a little bit too much in terms of the constant references to like the Conan Doyle stories. A study in pink instead of a study in scarlet. They're so well in the world that they know that they can pull out a little thing, and if you're like a Holmes head, you might pick it up.
It is weird to think that they live in a world where there are no Sherlock Holmes stories.
Yeah,
because it is so ingrained in just culture that if you're going to reboot it and make it 21st century, what you're essentially saying is, here's this great detective who has no idea that there was actually the whole detective story genre started with Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah, it makes you wonder if other like
trips me up, man.
Other vampire stories. Is there a Dracula in other vampire stories?
There wasn't Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
There was there.
So there we go.
Cares?
All right, dudes. So before we talk about who gets what points and what points are given and who Jeff likes more, I want to pitch my Sherlock Holmes adaptation. This
isn't quite the Borglum bag.
It's not the Borglum bag.
This is just out of Jeff's.
It's just you're going to be eye rolling for the next few minutes. Okay, it's Southern California. It's the late 80s. It's some suburban family. It's a teenager kid who's kind of something like Keanu Reeves in River's Edge meets Keanu Reeves in Bill and Ted. So
I like it. You got me.
The show is called No Shit He's just this smart-ass fucking asshole kid who skateboards around solving like local crimes, like who stole the money from the Pac-Man machine at the pizza parlor or whatever.
I like it.
But like Sherlock Holmes, the smartest kid in high school is the dumbest kid in his family. Like he's also, when he gets home, he's the fucking mental midget of this house because everybody's like a college professor and brilliant and stuff like that. No shit, Sherlock.
You know what? Greenlit.
Okay, greenlit.
Cool.
Sweet.
I can see the green light from here.
Oh.
Yeah. Glowing bright.
Oh, that's just on his phone. Oh, I thought it was like from the movie studio. Okay, so this was certainly a fun topic, and here are the things that I kind of thought were cool. Without a clue, a lot of nostalgia for me for that film, so that gets a point. You guys both get a point for Sherlock. And I have never heard of The Beekeeper's Apprentice, and so now I want to kind of go check that out. And the Looney Tunes Deduce, you say. So those are the things that get the points. And
just throwing some Daffy Duck, whatever you need to.
Yeah, that's pretty much, that's unfair. That's kind of a automatic point.
And Christopher guessed at the end of Guffman doing his Sherlock Holmes impersonation. The plot is thickening, Watson, as it would seem. All right, so this has been the Mount Rushmore podcast. I, as always, am Jeff.
I'm Richard.
I'm Michael.